Hi, you're watching Bread and Roses, a weekly political social magazine that's broadcast in Iran in English and Persian on New Channel TV. I'm Mariam Namazi and I'm presenting this week's program with my co-host Fariborz Puya.
Hi from me.
In this week's program, we're going to be discussing the issue of why a scapegoating of immigrants is xenophobic and racist. We'll have a very interesting interview with the human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell on this very issue. What are the myths around immigration and why immigrants are scapegoated? We'd also have shocking news of the week, which is the terrible news of the attack on a children's school in Peshawar, as well as the insane fatwa of the week, which will be on Baha'is in Iran and how they have been deemed to be haram by a fatwa that's been issued recently. Anyway, before we go into our program, let's first listen to a short background clip on the main issue. Stay with us. In Britain and Europe, immigrants are being blamed for social ills, and there's a rise in far-right and xenophobic parties and groups. Recent demonstrations in Germany against immigrants and a focus on immigration as the main election issue in Sweden are examples of this. In Iran too, there is similar anti-Afghan propaganda, with the regime blaming them for everything from crimes to drugs. Much of the propaganda against migrants is based on myths, with migrants being used as scapegoats for government cuts and austerity measures for profit and self-interest. We are hearing a lot about immigrants being the reason behind so much of societal ills right here in Britain, but this is something that's taking place across the world, and we've seen it quite extensively in Iran as well against Afghans. And I think it's interesting how, particularly in times when there's some form of crisis, that those who are the most vulnerable in society, and of course that's migrants and asylum seekers, they're often blamed for ills that very often are the direct result of austerity measures, government cuts, and you find that the government often uses migrants as a scapegoat in order to avoid scrutiny of its own policies and measures.
I think you're right. Look at when the Greece economy went into recession as a result of the banking crisis. We'll see the rise of the right-wing fascist party, New Dawn, in an attack on immigrants and foreigners in Athens and other cities in Greece. And you'll see that in Britain again with the rise of UKIP. You'll have in Germany now, in recent weeks, we've had demonstrations. The neo-fascists come to the streets and around the issue of immigration, and Swedish right-wing. You can see that. It's very, actually, I think it's very corporately driven. So it's not just, oh, there's unemployment, so people get upset. So it's not from within the society. It is very designed, corporately driven. Corporate capitalism actually drives this. Automatically, as soon as they want to reduce the rights of the population, reduce cuts to public services and social services of various kinds, parallel to that, to divert their attention, they support the right-wing groups, so they divert the attention of the society from the real issues that exist and the policies.
Well, I mean, it does make sense, because when you look at for example, the airtime that a group like UKIP gets, even though they really don't have that many members in Parliament, or even in the European Parliament, it's definitely, it's a useful tool. UKIP has sort of made it respectable to be bigoted against migrants, to be xenophobic.
And I think media has a great part to play. Nigel Farage was taken to New York for an interview in Fox News. Immediately after the end of the interview, he's called back he called to the back room to speak to the boss, and guess who that was? That was Murdoch. They had 45 minutes of chat behind closed doors. Clearly, media and corporate sort of capital really is behind this drive. They organize them, they're continuously in the news, and they support them. The rise of UKIP is media related as well. It's not a hype, but it's part of the social engineering and redesigning the politics in various countries to push through the cuts, austerity and the cuts. Absolutely, definitely. Yes.
And let's listen to the interview we just did with the wonderful human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell. He talks in depth about this, and particularly he gives examples of the myths around this issue. It's a wonderful interview. Do stay with us and listen to it, and we'll be back to discuss it further. Hello, Peter Tatchell. Thank you for agreeing to do an interview with us. You are, you know, a hero for many people in Britain and internationally as well. There are so many things I could talk to you about, but I would like to focus on the issue of immigration, because there is a huge lot of concern now about this sort of anti-immigrant climate that we're faced with here in Britain as well as Europe. Why do you think that is the case?
My first observation is that, having studied the experience of the economic crisis in the 1930s and the way in which minorities were scapegoated then, in particular Jewish people, you can see there are echoes of that scapegoating today as we face a contemporary economic crisis. The target this time is primarily refugees and immigrants. It is very, very disturbing the way in which not only the far right, but even some mainstream conservative parties have embraced this anti-immigrant agenda. But more than that, of course, even some of the social democratic parties have also piled on the anti-immigrant bandwagon. And to me, apart from the simple unethical nature of those attacks on other mostly poor and vulnerable people, it's also very disturbing in the sense that it's giving a false narrative. There is an economic crisis. It wasn't caused by asylum seekers or immigrants. It was caused by bankers and other big finance houses which played fast and loose with the economy. They've got away with it. None of them have been sent to prison. None of them have even been prosecuted. Yet, poor immigrants who are desperate for a better life and who in many cases are actually contributing to our economy are being blamed.
Yeah, well, let me ask you about that. There's a couple of points that come out of what you've said. One is the issue that a lot of this blaming is based on myths and untruths, really. Can you expand a bit on that?
Well, we know in Britain that most of the immigrants who are coming to Britain from other parts of Europe, mostly from within the European Union, these are very enterprising, energetic, hard-working people. They're doing jobs that most British people are unwilling to do. If we didn't have them here in our workforce, our economy would be worse off. So far from being a drain, they contribute to the British economy and indeed to the wider European economy. So one of the myths is, you know, they are taking our benefits and, you know, exploiting the welfare state. The reality is that immigrants on the whole contribute more than they take out. They're less likely to apply for benefits. They've come here because they want to work, they want to earn a decent income, and many of them have the skills that we need. And even when they haven't got the skills, they're doing unskilled jobs that employers cannot find British people to do. Some people argue that they're coming here to take advantage of what's called health tourism. They're here to take advantage of our National Health Service. Yet the reality is the figures are very small, plus most of these are young immigrants who are fit and healthy. They're not draining the National Health Service at all. The real drain on the health service is, of course, the million-plus Britons, elderly, mostly elderly Britons, who are living in Spain. They're much more likely to be a drain on the Spanish health service than the European immigrants who come to our country. In addition, of course, our National Health Service depends on foreign nationals to function. A quarter of all the doctors in the National Health Service in Britain are from overseas. Now, we couldn't function without them. So to blame them is really, you know, poking ourselves in the eye. They are vital for the health service and the care it provides.
And in a way, you referred to this where you said that the economic crisis was the result of, something else, and immigrants are being scapegoated. And it's the same with all the cuts in social services, legal aid, schools, libraries are being closed. And again, immigrants seem to be the easiest scapegoat for all of this, don't they?
Yeah, it plays into a racist subtext. Now, not all the people who make these arguments are necessarily racist or racist by intent, but the actual effect of what they're saying does certainly have racist overtones, because most of the migrants they're complaining about are from other nationalities and other ethnicities. It's very, very easy to point the finger, but this is a typical tactic of the right all throughout history. Right-wing political parties have all throughout history sought to scapegoat and demonize others to distract attention from the crisis and the problems and the failures of their governments, but also to deflect attention away from what is really causing austerity and economic downturn. It has been a reckless free market capitalist system where some very rich and powerful people have exploited it for their own advantage, taken risks which have turned out to be disastrous, and everybody else is having to pay. Now, the immigrants and refugees did not cause this crisis. They are not responsible for it. If we got rid of them, it would not have meant there was no crisis. The crisis would still be with us.
And in a sense, you're saying they're helping to alleviate some of the crisis in the sense of, I just read the statistics that all of the new nurses, out of all the new nurses, I think a majority, was it 5 out of 6 or something ridiculous like that, are actually foreign born, and how important they are to the health service, as you had mentioned as well.
And can I just say that some years ago, I helped an Iraqi gay man get asylum here in Britain. He'd been under threat of being killed by the Shiite Islamist militias in Iraq. He escaped to Britain. He was a doctor, and when he won asylum, he ended up working in a part of the country where his particular skills were desperately needed. So he ended up making a real positive contribution to the health needs of people in that community.
Yeah. I think one of the issues also, which I'd like to go back to, is one of the things you mentioned in your last response. And it is this whole idea that there are racist undertones when immigrants are targeted. Can you explain that more? Because you do find a lot of mainstream parties also talking about the issue that discussing immigration and in a way doesn't have racist undertones. Why do you think that it does?
Well, I think we know that there are a big sort of campaign going on, or campaigns going on around immigration. Some, of course, is from within the EU, from Poland, Bulgaria, and Romania. But a lot of it is, of course, from other non-European countries and non-white countries. And so it's very interesting the way in which people from the far right, like the BNP, the British National Party, and the English Defence League, are flocking to support UKIP, the UK Independence Party. They come from a place of racism, and they see UKIP, which claims to not be racist, as serving their particular interests, their anti-immigrant, anti-asylum seeker agenda. So I think that support is channeling to UKIP. And even within UKIP, we know there are many, many people who have been exposed as closet racists. It's come out in the end that they have in the past said and done things, or even in the near present, said and done things that most people would say was racist. I think what's really disturbing is that instead of challenging the UKIP agenda, the Conservative, Labour and Liberal Democrat parties seem to be pandering to it. They seem to be buying into that agenda and seeking to out UKIP UKIP. That's not the way to defeat UKIP's false narrative. It's not the way to get to the truth and to find a solution. Getting rid of immigrants or restricting their numbers is not going to solve the fundamental problem, which is that our economy has been screwed by the bankers and other big corporate interests, and they're still doing it. They are raking in billions for themselves while everybody else is suffering. Yet UKIP and the mainstream parties are pointing the finger at immigrants and refugees. They did not cause the crisis. They are not to blame.
And of course, this is not just a UK problem. I mean, you're seeing the rise of far-right anti-immigrant parties in Europe, and also, you know, this program will be viewed in Iran. There is a huge amount of xenophobia and racism against Afghan refugees and immigrants in Iran, perpetrated by the government in particular. And so this is something that we're seeing in many places. What are some of the ways in which we can combat that? You know, combat the sort of anti-immigrant fervour that we're witnessing, whether here or anywhere else?
Well, of course, one way is simply challenge the falsehoods that are put out by the far right and indeed often by the mainstream parties. You know, we need to set out the facts about, you know, who is coming here and what skills they have and the contribution they make. Now, there may be some instances where the system is being abused by immigrants. That may be true, but I think it's minor and does not in any way deal with the fundamental issue that most migrants are very hardworking, so are most refugees. They want to get on, they want to get a job. You know, in Britain we have a crazy system where someone who's seeking asylum is not allowed to work. We pay them a very modest and paltry and quite shamefully small amount of money to live on, and we provide them with accommodation, or we put them in detention. All of this costs money when these people are desperate to work. And if they were working pending their asylum claim, they'd be not only supporting themselves, but contributing to the exchequer by paying tax and national insurance. So we've set up a system that, you know, just reinforces all the criticisms that many people make. The other issue, of course, is that we do need to recognize that some of the real problems that we do face, like the lack of affordable housing, you know, inadequate skill sets in certain occupations, these are due to the failings of successive Labour and Conservative governments who failed to invest in new housing, who failed to invest in the creation of new jobs. You know, that failure is why we're in the mess. You know, if governments had contributed properly to the funding of new social housing and the creation of new jobs, you know, many people in dire straits would not be in dire straits. You know, they would have good quality housing. And we know that people who are happy and well off basically don't complain. You know, they don't have a problem because they are secure, because they've got a decent house, they've got a good job, their income is adequate. The grievance often starts from people who have been failed by the system, failed by the mainstream parties, when they are living in substandard housing, when they haven't got a job or their job is low paid and a zero contract hours. You know, that's when they can easily be manipulated and exploited by the far right and indeed the mainstream parties.
One final question. I mean, you mentioned, you know, how mainstream parties are now taking on this sort of xenophobic language, but also you said that there are analogies with 1930s. Does that worry you about what could happen if we don't, you know, fight back against the xenophobia?
I doubt very much we'd have a full-scale replay of the 1930s, but you can certainly see echoes of it in the rise of far-right parties in Britain and across Europe. Many of us would have thought that that kind of far-right revival would be very, very difficult to imagine. There were always far-right fringe parties, but they were tiny. Now we're seeing far-right parties getting 10, 15, 20, even 30% of the vote in some countries. And that is very, very worrying. What has happened to the culture of compassion and human rights that we thought had been embedded in our societies? The rise of the far right shows that we are susceptible as countries to some very ugly scapegoating, and that is worrying. We do need to act against it now to stop it getting out of hand. We need to ensure that immigrant communities and refugee communities are protected, that they are defended, that their contribution is recognised, valued and rewarded.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter Tatchell.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. I mean, the reality is that it is based on myths, is the nice way of saying it. It's just pure lies, lies about the realities of immigration and what it means for societies. And it's basically racism, pure and simple. I mean, very often people will say, well, it's not racist to discuss immigration. Yes, it is. It is when you want to discuss it within a framework of blaming immigrants for all the ills in society. There's a huge problem there.
Not even ills. It's getting ridiculous sometimes.
It's traffic.
Traffic on M4 suddenly is because there's too many populations, too much, and where population comes from abroad. I think that's just, it's getting ridiculous. I think you're right. Yeah.
And I mean, the reality is that there's. For example, when Peter Tatchell talks about a lot of examples with cuts in healthcare, for example, and how important migrants are actually for the health service. And in Iran too, I mean, a lot of the hardest work is done by Afghan immigrants in that country, and the treatment that Afghans receive. Many of their children not having a right to go to education. You hear these heart-wrenching stories of the parents being deported and their children being left behind in Iran, detention and beatings and downright torture very often.
Yeah, and I think that's a part and parcel of any sort of right-wing. I mean, in part of modern times, the capitalism constantly generates xenophobia and racism. It doesn't matter whether it is in England, whether it is in Iran, whether it is in even Afghanistan. You'll see different groups, generating that sort of xenophobia within even Afghan society. In Pakistan, you name it. And in India, you have the untouchables. And I think that's the issue, that constantly to drive people to standard, you have to divide people. They have to constantly drive the wages down. And one way of keeping the wages down and people not asking questions is not only to divert their attention, but also to make people silent and not question things. Yeah. And I think that's it. So to fight for the rights of immigration and against fascism is part and parcel of any decent political party or any movement that wants to improve the lot of the human beings today.
Yeah, I mean, do tell us what you think about this. I think we really need to push back the sort of right-wing, anti-immigrant, xenophobic fervour that's taking hold. We have to stand up and say, hands off immigrants, and for people to come out and in full force in defence of immigrants and migrants and their rights. Send us your comments and we'll be happy to discuss them in future programmes. Let's now go to the shocking news of the week. In the the shocking news, obviously everybody's heard of the heinous attack of the Taliban against a school in Peshawar, Pakistan, where 132 school children have been killed, massacred, along with 9 staff, the principal of the school. And I mean, really, it's so heart-wrenching when you read about and see what's happened. I mean, one father came and said, in a few minutes, you know, all of my dreams have been destroyed, you know.
And those dreams are destroyed on a daily basis. That's just one incident, Middle East and Pakistan. The question is that why these groups are given a space to operate freely in parts of Pakistan, and also the Pakistani government is in cahoot. It arms these groups, allows these people to operate, they work through various religious institutions, and they've carved up parts of the society for themselves. That's the question that needs to be asked. Why these groups and really fascist groups are given free hand to operate in Pakistan and in that region? I think that's the question.
One of the things too is that some of their acts are so heinous that even sections of the Islamist movement say that they're opposed to it. For example, the Taliban in Afghanistan have said that they're opposed to this attack. And you've got Al-Qaeda saying that they're opposed to beheadings in response to ISIS's beheadings. The reality is that all of them are the same. They all represent a similar bleak situation for people.
Absolutely.
And they're just brutal.
Absolutely. And the reaction depends on how outraged people are, how people
exactly.
want to resist.
And that's why the rage has to continue.
Absolutely. And also, everybody needs to push all of these groups back. That's the only way they retreat and they start something questioning themselves, is for people to actually say no to the Islamic and religious fascists in the region. I think that's the important thing.
Yeah, definitely. Do tell us what you think about this issue. Let's now go to the insane fatwa of the week. In the insane fatwa of the week, you have a Friday prayers leader in the city of Rafsanjan who has said that Baha'is, he's issued a fatwa saying that Baha'is are deemed untouchable or najis, and that any form of wheelings and dealings with them are deemed to be haram or sinful. Now again, continued pressure since the establishment of this regime against Baha'is, merely because they follow a different form of Islam to the regime.
Absolutely, and this community has been ostracized from day one when the Islamic regime was established. Many of them have been executed over the years because they have been told that they are making religious propaganda. Children are actually in the school ostracized, try to be segregated and deny sort of normal contact, human contact with everybody else. And they are denied going and accessing any higher education. The Ayatollah in the city of Rafsanjan in Iran has actually said
Friday prayers.
Prayer. He's said the Baha'is do not have citizenship rights. So, and also there's always question about the property rights, all of those. They want to get rid of these people, and that's the result of having a religious government doesn't tolerate a sect within itself.
Definitely. I mean, we talked about a 12-year-old Baha'i girl who was refused burial merely because her family were Baha'i, and this is an ongoing problem for Baha'is in Iran. And of course, lots of people in Iran face problems because of a theocratic regime, as you said. We hope you enjoyed the issues that we raised in this week's program. We'd love to hear from you. Do keep sending us your comments. We won't be having a program next week because it's the end of the year and we'll be celebrating, but we hope that you have a wonderful week and a good new year, and we'll see you in the new year. Goodbye.